Good afternoon here in the UK, good morning in America, and good evening in the Philippines. And wherever you are in the world, hello and welcome to Effie Barker Human Interest. I am so thrilled today because joining us today is a veteran radio and print journalist who has exceptional talent in writing, Mr. Joel Bellman. Hello.
Good morning, Effie. Thanks for having me.
We've seen this over time. Since he took office of discrediting experts. I am curious sometimes, what the psychologists really say about this attitude of putting down others to elevate himself?
Well, I read his niece's book, Too Much and Not Enough by Mary Trump. She was his niece, the daughter of his older brother, Fred, the one who tragically died of alcoholism at a very young age. And, she feels very bitterly toward the rest of the family, partly because of, a conflict over the estate, but also partly because she's a trained and professional clinical psychologist who, has considered carefully what is the psychological makeup of her uncle throughout his life, what she has seen in family settings, what she has observed as a public official. And, her book is a kind of depressing but persuasive litany of serious psychological issues that he's got. Psychological abuse from his father, Mary's grandfather, Fred, unreasonable expectations, spoiling, he was kind of the golden child who could never do wrong. So the father always made excuses for him. Reportedly bribed people to get him into good schools, encouraged him to take a very tough and confrontational attitude in business and his personal dealings, to make excuses for him to help buy his way out of trouble. He's used bankruptcy as a business tool to just walk away from, his debts when it suits him. And basically, he's gotten by his whole life, bullying people, intimidating people, shedding responsibility, shifting blame onto others, building himself up, belittling and demeaning others. His treatment of women, particularly, is famously terrible, insulting, abusive, unfaithful, serial affairs, cheating on all his wives. He's just a very, very damaged guy.
I was curious about it because, I'm a new mom and I keep wondering, when you raise a child, you're actually designing them. That's why it's a job to design a person who they will be.
Yes, you model behavior, and we've always expected our public officials, whatever faults and flaws they have in their private lives, and everybody does, it's always been expected that as a public official, part of your job description is to be a role model, to model telling the truth, to model taking responsibility, to model civility and respect for other people, kindness and consideration. Look at the way the Queen conducts herself in the UK. A big part of her official duties are charity work, compassionate, things, volunteerism, military service has always been a part of the royal family, because those are seen as sort of national virtues that it's hoped that the public would model and learn from, that even people of wealth and privilege and power need to exhibit some kind of service and selflessness in their public conduct.
Well, let's talk about election. What do you think of the election campaign so far?
Well, I think this has been a campaign like no other in our lifetime, and really a campaign like no other in U.S. history. Between the limitations on physical appearances and campaigning door to door, and the traditional kinds of politicking, whatever the president is doing, politicians and candidates all up and down the ballot have generally been avoiding, the kind of campaign activities that we've traditionally seen. But now we have this, virtual space where people can campaign. and conduct, Zoom meetings and Zoom events, interviews like we're doing now, or large scale events. And there's never been anything like that either. So it's a new way of relating and communicating. And as far as its effectiveness at persuasion and influence, I think the book is yet to be written on that. We don't have enough metrics really to see how that works. We are seeing extraordinary behavior in terms of vote by mail, what traditionally we called absentee ballots, where the people who would vote by mail would be mainly the ones who, for one reason or another, were unable to vote in person. Well, for the last few election cycles, more and more people have been voting by mail by choice, not because of an inability, but because it's more convenient. And of course, this year, it's largely a necessity. And that's why California Governor Gavin Newsom, by executive order, directed that every registered voter in California, without having to request one, would automatically receive a vote by mail ballot and would be able to cast their ballots by mail if they chose. If everything works out, I'll be working myself as a poll worker at one of them.
Wow, okay.
So people will be able to cast their ballots in person there. They will be able to turn in the ballots of vote by mail that they've already filled out there. We'll have to see how it works. But right now, from everything I'm seeing, and I don't know what the numbers are in LA County specifically, but from everything I've been reading, there has been an unprecedented turnout of vote by mail ballots returned, something like 55 million, I think, last I heard. And there were only 130 million votes total cast in the last presidential election in 2016.
Who do you think will win and why?
I am definitely not going to get maneuvered into predicting. I will just say that all indications are that it's looking pretty strong for Vice President Biden at this point. But there's still far too many unknowns.
Do you think this pandemic will be a cause of the outcome of the election?
Yes, I think clearly people's concerns about the pandemic, even though they differ by party affiliation, as I mentioned before, I think it's pretty clear that the overriding issue will be the pandemic and the handling of the pandemic. People worried about their own physical health and safety, but I think a very close second will be their worries about the economy and the pandemic's effect on the economy. So I think between those two things, more than climate change, more than foreign policy, more than infrastructure, right? I think unemployment, the economy, and people's health and safety, and their prospects for getting back to work and recovering their lost savings, and being able to see their friends again in a safe environment. I think that is what's going to be uppermost on people's minds. That's pretty clear.
How do you think the pandemic affect the U.S. long term, and what changes will it cause?
That's a very good question. I think it's going to be a couple of years before we recover our ability to hold public events the way we used to, which means parts of the economy, like the performing arts, like the concert industry, like sporting events, are going to be very severely impacted for probably at least a year and a half or 2 years. Even after it will be deemed safe to go out again, I think it's going to take a little bit of time before people get used to going out again and start feeling comfortable again, even if it's medically safe to do so based on the numbers. I think there's still going to be some reluctance and resistance to fully jump back into the saddle. And I think the economic impacts on those industries are going to be felt for a while. I think Zoom meetings and working virtually is probably going to be accepted more widely and institutionalized. And even after there's no longer the immediate pressing need that we now have to do this, I think a lot of businesses are going to discover that they can actually function this way.
There's so many things
more convenient.
happened in this pandemic that we thought it's not possible,
Right.
kind of being forced.
Right. I think it certainly changed people's understanding of and reliance on e-commerce, online shopping, ordering food online. Those sectors have, right, those sectors have performed outstandingly, and they've been very profitable, and they've really ramped up their capabilities. And I think people are going to appreciate that convenience and utility value, and they're not necessarily going to significantly tail that back as they can get back to normal lives.
I think the money's there, the jobs are there. It's just switched into a different medium.
Right. I think that's right. And I think those that have relied on brick and mortar retail are going to continue to have problems. I think it's a little early to tell, but I think there probably have been some permanent impacts on the movie theater industry, the movie going industry, because I think a lot of people realize they don't need to see everything in a movie theater anymore. There are going to be some big, tentpole action movies and so on. Date nights are still going to be popular when people can go out, but movies are expensive, and there are a lot of movies that you don't need to pay $17, $18, $19 to see in a theater. If you could see a super, high definition version on your big screen TV, I think movie theaters are, they're going to be hurting. I think the movie industry is, they can continue to produce their features, but they're going to be exhibited a different way. I think the problem is going to be in the exhibition end, not the movie production end or the TV production end, but in the exhibition end. And these big boxes where people sit in a dark room and watch the projection and pay a lot of money to do that are going to see some decline in their business. Some of them we can clearly see, but there are a lot of others that are only going to manifest themselves in the coming years. And it's a little too early, I think, to predict, the whole panoply of changes that we'll see.
Yeah. So my last question, what has the pandemic revealed about California, and has your view on California's society and economics has been changed by the events of 2020?
We've never experienced a real pandemic in California in my lifetime, although we have experienced several economic downturns before, not on this magnitude, this suddenly, but on the other hand, given that we know what has squashed the economy this time, which is a health crisis, when the health crisis passes, a lot of the economy is going to be able to slowly come back. So I think what we've seen in this recession from the pandemic that we didn't quite see in the others is, I think, a greater degree of resiliency. I think the economy is more diverse today than it was in 2008, 9, and certainly more than it was in the early 90s. There was a very serious recession in California, specifically after the collapse of the Soviet Union, because so much of our economy at that time was based on the defense industry. And the defense industry, of course, was thriving when there was a threat from the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union collapsed and that particular threat diminished, national defense spending went way down. And that had a very, very damaging impact on the California economy. And it took us a number of years to recover because we weren't diverse. Well, the economy's gotten a lot more diverse. And I think people have gotten a lot more resilient. We're not so dependent on one or two sectors anymore. And we have the benefits of this kind of, cyberspace kind of existence that we did not have then. And we've transferred our commerce there. We've transferred our communications there. We've transferred our ability to work remotely there. And that capability just did not exist back then. So I think California has shown itself more adaptable and flexible and resilient than in previous pandemics. And I think maybe more adaptable and resilient than even we expected we would be until we were put to the test. So I'm feeling pretty optimistic about our ability to come back. And I think we've had some good local leadership in Los Angeles. We've had some good leadership at the state level with a governor who, unlike the president, has been absolutely focused on listening to the science and trying to respond very quickly and proactively with shutdowns, with emergency equipment, with listening to the metrics from the counties and guiding his reopening plans based on that. So I feel like we've shown more capacity to respond in a responsible, cooperative, collective way than pessimistically I might have anticipated before. So that's been reassuring in a very positive way.
Mm-hmm. I know a lot of people, I mean, come out of the pandemic differently. Some people are taking advantage of this time, maybe spending more time with the family, they become a better person, and some people birthing a new ideas and become a millionaire, all kinds of things. So you personally, I want to know, how are you coming out of the pandemic?
Well, I've been very lucky in the sense that I've been working from home, since I retired from full-time work in 2015. I've had a lot of practice working at home, not just freelancing, but working in the house. And over the last couple of years, my wife has been working remotely. She retired from a law firm job and took a different kind of legal job working in-house for a union, where she can conduct a lot of her business at home, virtually, on Zoom meetings and by telephone. And we've gotten used to working at home with one another. And, I have my younger son is currently in graduate school online, remotely from home. So we have basically 3 adults working at home, but a lot of my friends who aren't used to or weren't used to working at home, and maybe single.
How is someone single going on a date this time? I read an article the other day about it.
It's very difficult, and I really feel for those friends. And I've had some heart-to-hearts with people. I think some people are psychologically having a much more difficult time. Their jobs were much more impacted. They've lost revenue. Like my wife's union clients, their members are performing artists, dancers and singers and so on. They basically haven't been working since the beginning of this because all the productions are shut down. So their revenue was severely impacted. Their ability to practice and perform has been, virtually eliminated. Those who are used to working collaboratively with other artists haven't been able to do that. So they're having a very difficult time psychologically and financially. And there are a lot of industries and professions like that. And I think people are working very hard to cope with it. And, you read, lots of articles and lots of service features in various publications are all geared toward dealing with the exercise, dealing with psychology, dealing with interrupted sleep patterns, trying to de-stress, sex and romance,
I know. On the one hand, I was thinking, well, maybe it's slow down the spread of the other disease caused by sex because people are not.
Yeah, I think
low AIDS, virus, HIV, it's STDs.
I think there probably, there's obviously been a reduction in STDs, but there also has been a reduction in other infectious diseases too. We're in flu season now, and while the flus can be serious, the fact that people are doing so much social distancing and social isolating because of the pandemic means there's also less spread of the conventional flu.
True.
So I think probably there's been a lot less spread of other kinds of diseases as a result, which is a benefit. But as I mentioned before, we've discussed there are financial and psychological downsides, even though there are other anticipated upsides. So I think it's been very difficult, but people are really, I think, from what I've seen at least, and from what I've read, most people are really trying to do their best to cope.
Anyway, this has been really a good chat, and I'm glad that you've agreed with this. If there's anything else you want to add of things that I wasn't able to cover, and maybe your last message to all Americans in America and everywhere in the world who can vote, maybe you could give a message.
Yeah, I guess, well, in terms of voting, yeah, I would say your vote is your power and your voice. And I believe so strongly in exercising our rights and responsibilities to vote. When I think what people have suffered over the years, you know, the vote suppression and deprivation of votes for African Americans in the Deep South, what Iraqis and people in dictatorships experience when they're deprived of their votes or the votes are manipulated. Your vote is ultimately your only expression of democratic power against the government, you know, to make your voice heard. So there is nothing more important than voting. And I would just urge everybody to take maximum advantage of your opportunities and your obligations and your rights to exercise that. And beside that, I would say, listen to your public health authorities. Don't be stubborn, be prudent for yourself and your family and for the consideration of your fellow citizens. Follow the public health advice. Treat people with respect and courtesy and civility, because everyone is under terrible psychological stress, and it just makes it that much worse when we don't exercise that kind of consideration and human compassion. So we basically need to take care of each other. That's all. Take care of each other.
Thank you, and good luck to all of us on the election. And
thank you for having me.
Odds be on our side.
Thanks.